and we gave you some foundational exposure and experiences to improv, which is one of the foundational activities we think helps. Today we go to step 2, which is to have you begin to actually practice communicating in several ways. One involves distilling your message, translating what you do for multiple audiences, and in some cases across multiple platforms. Different kinds of audiences who understand what you do, why you do it, what it means, and you beginning to craft those kinds of clear, compelling messages and adapt them for different audiences. And we'll do that in 2 ways. We'll break into small groups and we'll do this conversationally, and then we will put you on television and have some journalists throw some questions at you so that you practice your distilling techniques in a different kind of way, in a more uncontrolled environment. And as a bonus, you all get to watch yourself on television, okay? And then see how you come across and what you say. And there will be instructors in there who will point out some things to you that I think will be very helpful. And then in the afternoon, we'll go into the first real writing workshop. You all turned in writing samples. Is Gene here?
He's out.
He's still drinking coffee. He was up all night going through your writing samples, okay? And he'll give you some feedback to what you've done, and there will be 2 more sessions. So today we'll go through distilling your message, we'll go through writing. Tomorrow morning there'll be 2 more important workshops reinforcing improv. You'll go through more improv, a little bit more complexity, and you'll go through another writing workshop, okay? Before we will all reassemble here for a kind of a working lunch. So now let's talk about baseball and Samantha saying it's unfair, right? So, I want you to think about baseball. You all recognize who this is? No. You don't recognize who this is? Alan is shocked. Derek Jeter. We come from New York, so there's a certain level of chauvinism that everybody recognizes Derek Jeter. How can you not recognize Derek Jeter, who was the captain of the New York Yankees, just got his 3,000th hit this week? It's a big deal, especially back in New York, even if you're not a Yankee fan. That's a picture of Derek Jeter. How many of you think you know baseball pretty well, other than Samantha? Raise your hand. You know, this could be tougher than I thought. This may be tougher than I thought. How many of you know of baseball? Let's just start it that way. That's good. And how many of you think you know the rules pretty well? You know pretty well. You don't have to be an expert. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to take out a pen and get comfortable and take out a pad. I'm going to show you a paragraph from a newspaper story about a baseball game. And I want you to translate that paragraph for someone who knows nothing about baseball. Nothing. Samantha, you know nothing about baseball?
I don't know nothing. I know something.
Okay, well, you have.
Oh, all right. You're
if somebody didn't know anything about baseball, nothing, and I'm going to give you this, I want you to explain this paragraph to them. In the bottom of the 9th, Jeter worked out a 1-out walk and stole second. But Papelbon and Swisher and Texera, Papelbon, who is a pitcher, by the way, for the Boston Red Sox, got Swisher and Texera, 2 other Yankee players, to strike out swinging to end the game. So you've been given this challenge. Here's a paragraph. You're going to explain this to someone who knows nothing about baseball. So I'll give you 5 minutes to try to do it.
Now, this person thinks like a pitcher is something that pours water. You know, this person knows nothing about baseball. A base is something in chemistry.
Right. Akin to somebody who knows nothing about your specialty whatsoever, really has no background, has just landed here from another part of the planet. But you can communicate with them.
write a comment? Is that what you're asking?
No, you need to train, you need to just make some note. You're going to explain this paragraph to somebody who knows nothing about
You're
baseball.
going to tell them what happened, basically.
Tell them what happened. Tell them the story. This is a story, a piece of a story. You're going to tell them the story and make them understand as much as they can, and they don't know anything about baseball. Rosie's having a hard time. Yeah. Do the best you can. Next time.
If anyone wants to contribute a rugby example, we'll be glad to take it.
That's Andre, if it was rugby, you could explain this, right? Andre was a great rugby player. You could explain this. But this is our national pastime, so we should be able to explain this. And in a minute or two, I'll ask for volunteers who want to take a crack at this, okay? Valerie, how are you? Good morning.
I tore a tendon yesterday, so that's why I'm late.
You tore a tendon?
I did.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Anybody ready to take a crack? Remind me of your first name? Doris? Doris is going to take a crack at this. Okay, so can everybody just speak? Do we have a mic? Let's do it with the mic. So I want everybody here and tell me what you think, okay? And you can keep playing with this. And okay, Doris, it's all yours.
Towards the end of the game, Jeter, the captain of the Yankees team, was successful during his turn at advancing his team's progress. But Papelbon of the Red Sox, the opposing team's leader, successfully stopped two other players from advancing on their turns, which ended the game in the Red Sox favor.
Everybody understand that? You understand that? What do you think? Somebody who lands here understands that or not?
I didn't learn anything about how they're playing the game. I don't know what it means to advance. Like, that's my only problem. I kind of want to know about, like, is there a ball? Is there a bat? Is there a...
Okay. Andre, what do you let me get the mic. Thank you.
You know, I don't know baseball at all, but what it sounds to me like is that the Yankees were ahead at the start of the ninth.
Right.
And that at the bottom of the ninth, they wanted to end the game. So although Jeter maneuvered to get on to second base, Papelbon decided that the next two guys should just strike out and end the game.
What do you think about that? Where are the Yankees? Who's Papelbon?
What's strikeout? Either the coach or the captain.
But what's strikeout mean? What do the Yankees mean? Who's the Yankees? I mean, do I have a sense? Rosie, you want to take a crack at this or comment?
Got it all wrong because I don't understand baseball.
Oh, that's okay.
So I said baseball is a game you play with a ball. One team has to throw the ball and the other has to hit the ball and run around in a circle before the other team catches the ball and gets it back to a special place on the grass field. In the ninth part of one particular game, Jeter, who is the guy on one team who was batting the ball, did something pretty good, I think. He hit the ball and got to first base, ? Then when someone else was hitting the ball, he managed to get to second. But two other batters didn't do so well. They didn't hit the ball. The other team won the game.
So what do you think? Somebody who lands here from another country, never heard this, they'll understand what this means?
I think a lot of it. Because, you know, and I think, I had something similarly, you know, so I'm a little biased. Should I read my
Yes, give us the mic. Let's try one or two more and we'll talk about it. You want to capture the essence of this. You want to capture, there's a particular moment here, there's a story here, right? You need to tell the story, right? And give people enough context to understand the story, but they don't need everything about this, right? What do they need to know? Go ahead.
Okay. Baseball is a game played by two teams of people where essentially somebody throws a ball and the other one tries to hit it and advance by running around the field. Derek Jeter, a star of this game, beat the pitcher and made it halfway around the field. However, the pitcher throwing the ball beat the next two people and ended the game.
Okay? What do you think?
You have to know what a pitcher is.
I say, I read it too fast, but he's the guy throwing the ball.
And the batter, right? Does it capture, this is a very big moment. This is a very,
No, it doesn't capture the excitement.
there's an excitement here. There's an emotional quotient to this particular moment in this particular game. There's a story here.
Well, you have to be excited about baseball, and I guess that's my problem.
But you got to, it's okay.
But, you know, if you look at the universal
Anybody else?
elements,
We'll try one or two more, and then I'll show you something that somebody did.
Okay. Last night, two baseball teams, called the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, played a baseball game which was close to the very end. The Boston team was ahead, but the Yankees had a few last chances to win. In baseball, there are 4 bases, and players advance from base to base when a teammate hits the ball successfully. The 4th base is called home, and if you reach home, you score a point, which is called a run. A Yankee hero named Jeter made it to second base, but the next two Yankee players failed to hit the ball, so Jeter did not score, and the Red Sox won.
Okay, you think that's going to captivate me if I don't know anything? It's going to grab me early on?
I could have said it was like the most important game of the season or something.
And they'll say, what's the season? And, you know, we'll go through all of that. Did you get me, you know, was it accessible enough for me to say, wow, and then understand that I maybe want to know more? Let's try one or two more, and then we'll move on.
I just had a comment that maybe at the beginning of that, if you had put in that there's a long-standing 100-year-old rivalry between the Red Sox and the Yankees, then the rest of it was really compelling.
You know, obviously we're doing this as we start the distilling exercise. So when you distill this, what's the real meaning? What's the essence of what you're trying to get people to know about this in your first pass, right? This is the first thing you're going to tell them.
I didn't even write whole paragraph anything because I think I'm the bottom of the whole audience.
Oh, good.
But anyway,
did you understand?
I have no idea about this. I don't know anything about baseball, and I think it's just a boring sport. Anyway, so I picture this paragraph in my brain. So in the bottom of the ninth, somehow to me, it's like maybe 12, 15, or 9 spots. And then the player made it just one step close to that spot, and then he made it just 1 second enough to get that spot before the ball.
Right.
Yes, and I don't know, problem got swisher, texture, whatever, but anyway, the other team, the player throwing the ball, he did a trick, something, and actually at the end of the game, he knocked out the other team, even though the other player made it to that point.
Okay. What's your first name?
My name is Moon-hee.
Moon-hee. Moon-hee, last question before we go on. Did any of what people said today, you're perfect because you don't know it, was this helpful to hear other people? Did it help you when you heard these other explanations? No. Not at all. Well, that's... No, you shouldn't apologize. It's perfect. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people who don't have any knowledge to understand something that often is very complicated, and you want to get them in your first pass to get the essence of something. Two more quick comments, and we're going to move on.
Well, I guess if I were talking to somebody that knows nothing about baseball, and I don't know very much, and if I were talking to somebody that was from another country, I wouldn't feel the need to explain baseball at all.
That's probably...
I would simply say, and I don't really know exactly what that means, but I would look at that and say, everyone understands what a game is. So I would simply say, I went to this game last night, and the star, just at the very end of the game, as the star was about to take it home and win it for everybody, it all went to hell. Somebody else came in, and they won, and the other guys won instead.
Okay, but
I mean, I probably wouldn't feel, at least the way that you set this up for me, I wouldn't feel the need to explain baseball.
Okay, but that's good. That's interesting. That's one of the things we want to talk about. What do you need to initially explain to someone? So, go ahead.
I really want to know what a one-out walk is.
Okay, but we're not going to tell you. So we're not going to tell you what a one-out walk is. Because if you're going to start to get hung up on a one-out walk, we're in big trouble. And this is the first time we're going to explain anything to somebody.
Seriously, our theory is first you get people interested. And then your goal is to get them to ask a question, like, what's a one-out walk? You want them asking that about whatever it is you do. Oh, that sounds dramatic. What's a one-out walk?
But if you're going to start to explain every time. So here's something that somebody wrote, okay? That tried to capture, it's a little long, the essence of this, the essence. The game was almost over when the captain of the home team made a last-ditch effort to win. He took a risk, okay? And it looked like it might pay off. His teammates tried to help him score, but they just could not make any headway. A key player on the other team shut them down. The game ended, and the home team lost to its most hated rival. So here's an effort to try to build in a simple story, okay? The heroic person on one side of a game tried to advance, he was let down, and eventually his team lost to the most hated rival. And it's a way of getting people interested a little bit in an emotional way, too. There's a heroic person, there's a heated rival, there's a moment of tension in the game, and it gets to what you were saying. When you first start, your first effort to explain something to somebody who has no knowledge, and the reason we do sports is because Natalie Angier, who is a science writer for the New York Times, has said that explaining science is like being a sports writer, okay, only the audience has no knowledge of sports. You know, sports, I was a newspaper editor, presumes the most amount of specialized knowledge of any part of the newspaper. People who come to sports have great knowledge. You don't explain to the people what a one-out walk is. You don't in the story. So trying to explain science is akin to trying to write sports for people who don't know anything about sports. And she said that's why it's so hard. And capturing the essence and starting and then getting them to want to know more and go from one level to the other is something that she practices in trying to distill what she does. You had some good stuff early on, too.
So I think one problem is that, I just don't understand what any of those things mean.
Right.
And I think a lot of people had that problem, that they didn't understand that this was that there was a last-ditch effort. So in order to write compellingly and tell a story, you have to understand all of the details about what's going on.
But you understand your details. You know about your own field. You know what the one-out walk is in your field.
Exactly.
You have all that context.
You have that knowledge. The
100-year rivalry and all that in your own field. So you can provide all that extra color that
But the next time you do this, I want you to think of this example. When you sit down the next time and talk to somebody who doesn't understand your work, I want you to think of Derek Jeter. I want you to keep Derek Jeter in your mind and say this is akin to that, incredible paragraph they put up about baseball that I didn't have a clue about. Okay? And that's what I'm up against in attempting to get people to get excited and to understand what I do and wanting them to learn more. So what's the essence of what I have to tell them first? When I reduce and distill what I do, what do I tell them as an entry point? And that's what we're going to do here for a few minutes.
Paul.
There's no reason to pull out New York and Boston here, right? They're touchstones that everybody has.
We don't need New York,
rivals.
But if you come from Indonesia, you don't know anything about New York and Boston, right? About being rivals, right?
If you're in America, you know a New York.
Yeah.
Yes. But what I'm saying,
you could have put
kind
me.
of touch base more with what some people know.
But the important thing is that they're rivals, and this was a big game between, these rivals. There's an emotional quality here to this. So let's just talk about, and Liz and I are going to kind of tag team this idea of distilling the message. Some of this was touched on by Casey last night. Some of this, you could pick up intuitively. We talked a lot about knowing your audience, but obviously that's the first key. When you're going to communicate, who are you communicating with? Are you communicating with a lay audience? Are you communicating with people who have an interest in your field? Are you communicating with funders? Who are you communicating with? Are you communicating with high school students or PhDs? And you need to establish that right away. And one of the things we're going to try to help you do is do this for multiple audiences. So one of the things we're going to do in our small groups at the end, you're going to get a secret card from us. You're going to get a card late in the process, and it'll tell you what audience you're speaking to. And then you'll craft something, and the rest of the group will have to guess who you're talking to. We're going to do that in the end as a culminating activity in this distilling group.
Are the slides going to be available?
Yes. Yes, we certainly can make them available. And, just reinforce what we've said now a couple of times. This is your problem, not the audience's problem. I don't mean the audience, has to show up. The Woody Allen 80% of life is showing up. You show up.
Right, and they have to stop tweeting while you're talking.
And they have to stop tweeting, and they have. But your job is to get what you want to that audience. It's not enough to say, I did my best, they didn't get it, it's their problem, which is sometimes the posture of smart people who, for a variety of reasons, won't admit that it's their issue. They'll say, well, people should know this. That's their problem.
Right.
I once spoke to a group of graduate students and in biochemistry, and we talked about the fact that 60% of Americans don't realize that they've ever eaten a genetically altered food, and a student got up and said, you're not telling me anything I don't know. American people are stupid. And another graduate student jumped up and said, there's a big difference between ignorance and stupidity. And it's our fault that they're ignorant. They're not stupid. So it's the audience. And then it's your job. And then look for common ground. When you're talking to an audience, depending on your audience, and this gets to being personal and human, look for ways to connect to the audience. When I get back to Stony Brook, I have to talk to a bunch of high school students. And I'm not in high school anymore, obviously, and I'm not going to pander to them, but I'm going to learn as much as I can before I go. I'm going to find out who they are and where they come from. And if I'm looking for examples to talk to them about, maybe I'll talk about new studies that indicate that texting may be an addiction. Something that plays a little bit to what I know they're doing. I'm going to try to know them. And maybe I connect to them in a different way. Maybe it's because we live on Long Island, or maybe because I'm at a university, or maybe because we have other things in common. But I'm going to look for touch points. Remember, in addition to a scientist, you are a person. You may be a teacher, you're a researcher, you're a parent, you're a little league coach. Right. You go to church. There's a lot of ways you can touch base and reach out in a very personal way and connect with your audience.
I was in one group where people were having a really hard time just being at all personal. And so we went around the group and said, just tell me one interesting thing about yourself. We came to a woman, this was at Cold Spring Harbor, who said, she couldn't really think of anything interesting about herself. And then finally, pressed, she said she liked to climb. She was a mountain climber as a hobby. But, it was just like that. So I said, well, what's the tallest mountain you ever climbed? And she said, K2. Which, this was this microbiologist who had climbed K2, but she couldn't think of anything interesting to say about herself. So, sometimes you just have to try to look at yourself as an outside person would look at you.
And it's the connection. Just think a little bit when you all got up yesterday, each one of you, and just introduce yourself. I was watching the rest of you. Everyone was really interested in everybody else. We relate. We are, as Alan said, social creatures. So we make that human connection. It's a big help as a communicator and looking for ways to do that. But being authentic. Don't be fake about it. No jargon. Be conversational. We talked about that. It's not always easy. That gets to the baseball example. Initially, I am not going to try to define what a one-out walk is. I don't really even care. Okay, that will be my third level of discussion with the person who's interested. Okay, that's not what and I want to be careful. It's such a barrier. immediately a turnoff. Oh my God, what's that? I
But
can't
unless somebody asks, like you, if somebody
Right.
asks, that's great. And you can say, well, it's a little bit complicated. I'm going to have to explain some other things about the game before I can get to the one-out walk. You know, but it'll take a little while, but sure, that's great.
And have one or two things initially you want to get across. Don't try to tell the whole story. That's where your point was. Don't tell me the history of baseball. You know, Abner Doubleday in 1869 came up with a game, right? You don't want to do that the first time you explain this. That's not what are the 2 or 3 things you're trying to capture initially? Not dumbing things down, not dumbing it down, not oversimplifying, but what are the most interesting or, you know, salient points you want to
And I
make?
think the other thing is a tip-off. If you start your discussion or answer to someone by just defining a lot of terms, it's just really deadly. And I think often people do that because they want to use a lot of terms that people don't understand, but then it's a deadly turnoff.
So here's something, right? Since
Yeah.
we're in California and we're in Hollywood, let's play this. Whoops, we have to go back and do this?
Click on the, can you click on it? No? Yeah.
Let's make sure we play.
Oh, I have to do it on the computer. Okay.
Okay.
I'll click on it. Oh, no.
Go back. Hit, except we have no sound.
We have no sound. All right.
Well, no, we'll try it one more time. We're not going to give up. Try it again.
Wait, I have to,
Hit the play button, Liz.
okay.
Here's a good idea.
Yeah.
Have a point. It makes it so much more interesting for the listener.
So that was in Trains and Planes, and, you know, he says to John Candy, Steve Martin, have a point. It makes
It's so much more
better for the listener. So have a point. What's your point? When you're speaking initially, what's the point you want to make? It's important. And avoid the curse of knowledge. This is a very interesting term. We usually don't think of knowledge as a curse, right? And the curse of knowledge is that when you know something very well, it becomes hard to imagine what it would be like not to know it. So if I'm a baseball fan, you know, I assume people know this. A pitcher? What do you mean you don't know what a pitcher is? Okay? So, you know, so you all are dealing in special fields in which you assume a lot of knowledge, and you walking around with this knowledge in your head, and you assume people understand a lot that they may not. And it's also kind of a secret handshake for you, right? It gets you to be part of a club that understands and shares this. And you've got to really avoid this curse of knowledge. It is deadly. Let me give you an example. Do you remember, let me go back. Do you remember what happened in 2011? Right after the attacks on the World Trade Center, we had that white powder and those anthrax attacks. Okay? So in order to deal with the anthrax attacks, the CDC, now here's the CDC, which is basically trying to give out information to the general public, decides to explain to the general public what anthrax is. And this is what they put on their website. This is exactly what they put on their website.
Right. Now, if you look at this, except for the and an R, there's almost no words there that ordinary people
This is
are
incredible to me.
understood.
This is incredible to me. This is what our public health people put up to explain to ordinary people what anthrax is. And so this really dramatizes what happens when you're not thinking about your audience and you're assuming incredible levels of knowledge and an important public health issue. Samantha, you...
I just feel the need to talk about that the BBC has been reporting the recent E. coli outbreak with E. coli as a virus. And I'm still...
Okay.
I know.
So,
I'm just...
did everybody hear that? So Samantha said the BBC has been reporting in the recent E. coli outbreak that E. coli is a virus, which is incorrect. And what's scary is, this would be scary enough if this was, you know, if you were just a medical researcher, but this is the CDC. Later they revised it, and
Well, actually, this is our revision.
Our revision, I'm sorry. This is our rewriting of this, about what would be a starting point to describe what this is about. A first sentence. that would get people to say, tell me a little bit more. What are the symptoms? How is it treated? But it's a place to get started, and it would lead to other questions. So that's what we really talk about. This is harder than you think. But when you see an example like the last example, you realize how terrible it is.
So can I just, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So you had said don't use jargon.
Yes.
But in that word, you use bacteria, which could, I mean, no, I agree it's not jargon, but I'm a biologist. But still, I mean,
You have to assume some
Right,
level
you
of
have to,
knowledge.
right.
So if you feel the word bacteria is a word that most people understand, you would...
but the BBC doesn't understand it if it's your bacteria.
Well, all right, so,
Not as
Have you complained to
yeah,
them?
that's what I was asking. Have you
Have you
complained
got,
to the
that's another thing,
BBC?
have you jumped up and down and said you got it wrong?
You should tell
That's
them.
your responsibility.
Seriously, seriously.
I often do that.
Like, do it,
Okay.
do it.
Because as an expert. So after you do, and then here's the next part. Yes?
Yeah.
By the way, speaking of that, it's not caused by bacteria generally, it's caused by a type of bacteria.
Okay, but that's a subtlety, and I don't mean to dumb it down. That would maybe the second thing you explain.
I don't think that's a subtlety myself, because my mom knows all about bacteria, and if she learns that bacteria cause anthrax in general, so just adding a type of.
Good. So there would be a way to make that better. So that would be a way.
Just since you encourage me to point out.
No, that's good. But that's what we want. As Alan said yesterday, we want this to be accurate. Accuracy is absolutely a requirement. It can be simple, but it has to be accurate. So you're absolutely right. That's a good point. So we need to revise that
All
slide.
right.
So now we've told people a little bit about anthrax, or we've told them a little bit about baseball. Now you can say, listen, it's more complicated than that. Richard Feynman was famous for explaining something in a sentence or two and then always saying, listen, if you want to know more, it's more complicated. Or I'm going to tell you something, but then it gets more complicated. So he told you, okay, I'm not going to tell you everything in a sentence or two. I'm not even going to try. My first point is to give you something accessible, accurate and accessible. And then I will add layers of complexity. It's okay. So now we're beginning to, after you engage the listener, get somebody interested. I was in a distilling group at the hospital at Stony Brook with somebody working in imaging, sophisticated imaging technology, and I asked her what she did, and she went on for 5 minutes to explain this equipment and how complicated it was and what they were doing. And deep in this discussion, she said, you know, and if we could get this right, we're going to be able to maybe find a cure for a disease that kills thousands of teenagers every year in America. And I'm saying, that's the access point. She says, I'm working in an area of imaging or technology that may be able to cure a disease killing thousands of teenagers. There's no way I'm not going to say, tell me more. There's no way, what's the disease about? What are you doing? Instead, she goes on this long, convoluted story. She's lost me 6 times. And then in the middle of this, she says what would grab my attention immediately. So you've got to find that point. You've got to find that point.
You have questions?
Yes.
When I give public talk, I like to put saying the context is very important for me. I try to make it as big a context as I can at the beginning, and it goes telescope down until you get to my word. And I want to sort of do that when I distill a message, but I'm not sure that's the best way. For instance, I would say, you know, on astrophysics, I would say, you know, for thousands of years we thought, you know, we'd see stars and the sky seemed unchanging. In the last 50 years we've seen it changing all the time. If you look at different wave bands, explosions, it's a very violent universe, and something like that. Puts it in context.
Right.
Is that reasonable?
Sure, and there's no one way. Kurt was saying that he's doing with astrophysics, and he wants to say something to the effect that we looked up at the night sky for 50 years or for centuries, and it looked the same, and in the last X number of years, we've discovered all these changes in the sky as a way of getting people interested in this mystery and what he's pursuing, and it seems like a very reasonable approach. You know, what's the lead? What's the point? How do you get people there? As a former newspaper editor, you know, the word lead, do you know what the word lead means in newspapering? Anybody? We used to spell it L-E-D-E. And it was the essence of the story. Often it's the first paragraph that summarizes, or it may be the key paragraph that summarizes for you what this story is all about. I have a confession to make. When my children were growing up and they would go to school and they would come home, I never said, you know, did you do anything in school? I'd always say, what's the lead? all right? They hated me for this. They still tease me for this. I wanted them, in essence, I didn't think about it, to distill their whole day and to give me something, that happened that I could grab a hold of. The obvious thing is you're going to use different levels of complexity for different audience. This is pretty obvious, right? And once you know your audience, you can layer on complexity in different kinds of ways. You can assume some levels of knowledge.
So I had a question, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but we can perhaps distill down our message, and we use very accurate and precise language, but then that often gets misinterpreted and sort of perpetuated. And the example I'm thinking of, I don't know if anyone else has read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, but people have said, people told her family, for example, who weren't educated about science, that your mom's cells may help to cure blindness or cancer, and now, then they go on and they tell everybody that their mom is going to give Stevie Wonder back his sight. This was a particularly compelling story. So how do you, even if we're very accurate, what do you do? Because you're simplifying, you're leaving out the details, it can get distorted quite easily.
Everybody heard that? So when you're going to simplify, because again, the simplification is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story. So you start with something simple, not wrong, and then you add layers, and then it's okay to say, by the way, this is what I mean, or be careful. I am not saying when I tell you that Henrietta Lacks' cells were used in research to help fight diseases, I'm not telling you it cured blindness. That's not what I'm telling you. Sometimes you have to explain what you're not telling people. And I think that's important for you to anticipate. So if you can anticipate how this could be misinterpreted, okay, you got to think that way. This becomes somewhat of a challenge. Tell a story. And, you heard Alan talk about this. Where possible. It's not always possible. That was the baseball story. What was the story there? It's not about pitchers and batters. And it's a real moment in time when something is happening and there's conflict and somebody wins and somebody loses. And so when you can, and part of that story is what you do and how you do it and where you did not get the answer you anticipated and what happened. And you can't always tell a story, but think about storytelling. Storytelling is so universal. It's so powerful. It's so compelling. When I get up to speak or other people get up to speak and I start by saying, listen, let me tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story. What happens to you? Do you pay attention to me? You lean. You almost lean. There's something about when I say that. It's the campfire thing, right? I'm going to tell you a story. And so as long as it's amazing. Right? Then you oversell it. But yeah, I'm going to tell you an amazing story. If you can do that every time you start and you can pay off, forget it. You don't need any of our help. And you might want to talk about this, Liz, this part.
No, we're just saying that sometimes even if you're in the middle of something and you don't have results, or your results are so specialized that they won't be that meaningful to somebody outside your field, the process of how you went about getting that can be a very fascinating story and can be very informative for the person hearing it, because I think one of the underlying problems with people understanding science is not so much that they don't know how facts, 40% don't know how far away the sun is. Well, really, it's not that important to know how far away the sun is. Frankly, it's probably more important to understand sort of the process by which science is done, and the fact that there are many blind alleys, that results can be matters of probability that then turn out to be untrue. Those elements of the process can be an important thing that you communicate.
It also
as
helps,
much as results.
It also helps fight misunderstanding. So if you're a woman and you read that you should go for mammograms, and then you read you shouldn't go for mammograms, and then you read that you should go for mammograms, and then you read you shouldn't go for mammograms, and you're saying, what's going on? Maybe if you understand that science is changing, maybe if you understand that as new research comes in, things are modified, then maybe you at least have some context of reading that and you don't get totally cynical and say, boy, nobody knows what they're doing, I don't trust anybody. When Pluto was thrown out of the planetary family, that was a terrible moment for me because I grew up with Pluto, And so you need to understand that science is provisional, right? If you can understand that, even the subtext, and you don't want to lecture and preach to people, but if they pick that up, it makes them understand.
Or that, just about Pluto, and correct me, you people who actually know about Pluto, but one of the things, I guess one of the bases was the relative size of Pluto with other objects. And now I've read recently that really the size of Pluto is in quite dispute. It's not very well established, that there's a real range of estimates for the size of Pluto, which maybe I'm wrong.
So is there a chance Pluto's coming back?
So maybe I'm wrong. Well, no, it's just that the idea that they might even be uncertainty, that the size of Pluto is not absolutely established, I found amazing in terms of how much is known just about the solar system. It just was surprising to me and interesting.
So the 2 points we're making here is that this idea of talking about the process, and often when you hear process, it's boring in general, but the idea of science, the discovery, the mystery, the false leads has two benefits. One, it gets people interested in what you do, and two, it helps in a subtle way educate them about the way science works, which is very important. And use examples and anecdotes and analogies wherever you can. So here's something that Nat Leanger wrote a couple of weeks ago in the Times. Jellyfish, a big problem, by the way, on the West Coast? I have no idea. You guys go to the beach and get stung and all. Too cold. It's an East Coast thing. Oh, we're so happy about that. Anyhow, so we get a lot of jellyfish. And Nat Leanger went and did a whole piece on everything you wanted to know about jellyfish. And she put them in her hands, and she says the jellyfish shimmered and glowed with its tendrils retracted. It looked like a round bar of glycerin soap or maybe a translucent diaphragm, and it felt equal parts firm, jiggly, slimy, like a slice of liver coated in raw egg. Ooh, not very attractive, but it makes me feel what that was like, right? So when you're trying to describe to people things that they don't experience themselves, look for vivid images as much as possible. And and all of these kinds of things. So and this may have been misinterpreted 12 different ways, but people still remember this. It's the essence of Einstein's belief in kind of an ordered universe governed by laws and unifying principles. Look at that. 8 words, and people will kind of use that to encapsulate.
And it's a homely image, playing dice, just like raw liver coated with egg. It's like ordinary things, using ordinary objects to make the image.
So when you looking for things, look for things that people can relate to. And this is hard to do, but when you get a good one, you'll get very excited. It's really interesting. And we talked about this. Emotion is memorable. Yesterday, people asked about, well, do I have to give my opinion? Emotion is not the same thing as opinion. Don't think that because you're emotional, you have to take sides in anything or be opinionated. We'll talk more about that, by the way, later, about being an advocate for the evidence. But you can get personal. You can share your passions. You remember the clip we showed of the young woman, the graduate student, talking about the BPA in the bottles, and finally it got down to her baby and her experiences. It didn't change the science. It didn't make it inaccurate. It didn't make her less a scientist to talk about that. But suddenly it became more personal and more compelling. And one of the things we'll try to do in your writing and in your conversations today is to get you to be personal and not be afraid to be personal. And what gets you excited? Why are you devoting your life? Why are you ignoring your spouses and your children to stay in the lab? What's the point? What's this all about? Why do you feel this passion? That's important, okay? And so Stephen Hawking says, we like to explore and are inspired by journeys to the unknown. Science is not only a discipline of reason, but it's one of romance and passion. So the most powerful way you can connect is to connect through that romance and passion where possible. And not every time, but that's what's going to get people when you even start to distill. Liz,
he took a flight to experience zero gravity. That's what that picture is from, just Stephen Hawking.
Liz, you might want to talk about this.
We often run into this. People feel like we're saying dumbing down, and that we're telling them to dumb down, and that's really not at all what we're doing. We're trying to find really entry points in which you can then be more complex. But I think a couple of ways we've mentioned already really is focusing on the meaning, as in the Jeter example, rather than on the details of the process, at least in the beginning. You're being totally accurate, and you're even describing it at a level of sort of emotional complexity that's not dumb. but you're not focusing on all the details right at the start. And as Howie said, as Feynman was famous for saying, just explaining that this is a simpler version. This is what I think is the main points, but it's more complicated in reality, and I can tell you about that.
So Michael Pollan, of course, who's from California, wrote this big book in defense of food. Anybody read this? It started as an article in the New Yorker, right? So it's a book, and how many pages is the book? Do you remember how many words? A couple of 100,000 words? He summarized the entire book in 7 words. 7 words. In fact, he did such a good job, he later complained that nobody will read my book because they got the 7 words. He said, you want to eat healthy? It comes down to 7 words. Eat food, which means not processed stuff, but real food. Not too much, and eat mostly plain. That's it. That's my whole book.
He followed it up with another book that was very short. And
he summarized it in 100,000.
Right, that's right. That's right.
He said at one point this was almost too good a job of distilling his message. But look at how he did that. So sometimes you say to yourself, could I, in a sentence or two, and it may not, can come up with something or some variation, maybe it's longer, if I could, as an exercise? So when we go into these small groups, you should think about that. Okay, Liz, some examples.
Oh, yeah. So this we took from ACS Nano, our sponsor in Paul's journal. This was a recently posted abstract. And, that's totally fine for academic literature. Now, we enlisted a physicist to help us try to translate this. So if our translation is wrong, which I'm sure people will be glad to tell us.
Before we show it, so this is something from a journal, which is perfectly acceptable. Does anybody want to take a crack at getting up and in 2 sentences explain this to the rest of us who find this to be totally incomprehensible? Or even piece of it? Does anybody want to take, what's the essence of this? Paul, go ahead. Sure. You have a mic? Where's the mic? Yes. So explain this to me.
So 1 atom thick layer of carbon, the same element that's in diamond, but in this case flat, is grown on a metal surface. And then when another layer is grown, it's damaged with a laser. And then a 3rd layer is grown on top of that. And each of these 3 layers is a single atom layer of carbon. And because that sandwich, the middle of the sandwich is different than the outside of the sandwich, the two layers of carbon that make up the bread, you can detect light with that sandwich very efficiently.
So why should I care about this?
Well, there are a few reasons. If you can look right through these single layers, so you could be detecting light at the same time that you're letting it go through. You could use it to convert the light into electrical energy, hopefully very efficiently. And then, unlike most other ways that we collect light, light is converted uniformly across different colors, from light we can't see for people who know the spectrum, right, lower energy than red, all the way up through the violet and beyond, so that we don't have to take we either don't have to make sandwiches of different materials, or we can count on, how do I say this, we can tell how bright the light is without having to do any further processing or computation. It turns out to be an advantage in this, and it's a very fast detector. So we have very fast pulses for scientific reasons. We can use these two.
Okay.
I went too far, but you asked.
So I'm going to ask Judy Muller, who knows nothing about any of this. So is that satisfying for you? You understand it?
I thought the first part was fabulous. I'm thinking, I got to interview this guy. And then the second part, you lost me entirely. Can you put it in a headline? Why is this important?
It's 1 sentence.
1 sentence.
What's the sexiest thing you can, now, you don't want to overdo it,
Right.
dumb it down, but if you had it in one sentence or two, explain to Judy, what's the essence of this and why we might care about it, what would you say?
Right. So this is, this material made all out of carbon, the same material that's in diamonds that we can make in a big window that can pass light through, but can also detect light that we can see, and on either end of the spectrum that we can't.
Okay, still complicated a little bit, right? It's better. So this may not be much better. We asked, I guess the scientists back at Stony Brook?
Yeah, Hal
Metcalf. We said, take a crack at this.
You misspelled Nobel.
Oh, yeah, we misspelled Nobel. Okay.
What we spelled wrong?
We spelled Nobel wrong and Nobel Prize. That's embarrassing. Okay.
That's embarrassing, but they won the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Prize.
The Nobel Prize, right. Yeah.
So this may get a little bit to Judy's question. And we're not looking to oversimplify it. This gets to the heart of, look what we're working on. We're working on some developments here that might make communications, et cetera. I don't know if this is accurate, Paul, but I assume it is. But it gets to the heart of what we're doing. And then tell me more, let me know what you're producing these sensitive detectors, very short pulses, and it might be used for optical communications between computers, so it will improve computing. And that may be a better way to do that. But I'm getting to the essence for why a general audience might care about what I do.
And one reason we put this misspelled Nobel Prize in is just that we felt this was a way of saying this is a big deal. This is a big, hot, new field. You may not know about it, but it won the Nobel Prize. That means it's important. And people respond.
So let's
sorry,
try.
somebody wanted to say something else?
I wanted
Yeah.
to just, so this is very intriguing because Science magazine, which is, one of the most prestigious, tries to do this. And I think, in my perspective, succeeds about 50% of the time. 50% of the time they actually don't simplify it enough for me to understand a cross-section.
That's interesting.
This is hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
It's really hard. And, you could see Paul, who did a good job, but struggled because even though he has this tremendous knowledge of this, he's trying to simplify it and get it down, and you don't want to over-dramatize it, you don't want to oversimplify it, but you're looking for a way to get Judy Muller's attention and be accurate, and that get Judy to say, okay, Paul, tell me a little bit more, tell me a little bit more. How about this one? There's another, we'll do one or two more examples, and then we're going to move on. Anybody want to take a crack at this? Anybody know this? Anybody want to take a crack at this? Get up and in a sentence or two explain this.
Okay.
What? That's fair.
Okay.
Sure. Mike, who has the mic?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so lead-acid batteries are common systems that are in all of our cars, so we know lead-acid batteries very well. But it turns out that theorists do a really lousy job of calculating complex systems like this. But recently, people have tried to calculate the voltage you should get out of a lead-acid battery. And they find out that if you just use simple quantum mechanics, you don't get the right answer. In fact, you have to use relativity. This is that funny idea that when you start to have heavy atoms, the electrons all behave in funny ways. And you need to put that into a calculation to explain the voltage you can get out of a car battery.
Okay. You wanted to add something? Okay. How about relatively start your car? Is that going to get your attention? That's going to get my attention, right? Now you don't need a spaceship moving at nearly the speed of light to see the effects of relativity. You can see them every time you start your car. Now I'm going to really want to know more about this. You've got my attention. And then it tells you that the lead-acid battery that starts most car engines gets about 80% of its voltage from relativity, according to computer simulations by physicists. And then it explains. It goes on to explain more. So this is a way to me that gets me interested in this and involved in this. And that's what you need to do. You need to find ways to do this.
I thought it was.
Paul?
Okay. Paul says it may be wrong.
Well, who's going to quibble about details?
We'll
No,
go back,
no.
we'll double check. No, we
We'll check. We'll check.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's right. It's right. We try to get these right. And again, that's always, but look at the difference when you approach it this way. When you step out of yourself, and you were close. You get the right idea.
Right.
On the fly.
Yeah.
I would also say that this, I mean, it's much more enticing, but it's not 10 seconds preparation. It's also, it may be giving an impression.
We don't want to do that. Although Casey talked about lying, and I don't mean lying, but this is not going to be inaccurate. If it's inaccurate, it's wrong. So remember, we want an access point, and if you think this is inaccurate, and I understand, but remember, you're speaking to a lay audience, and you're trying to get them involved, and they don't have a lot of knowledge.
It's your opening shot. Then you can say the next thing. That's our idea, at least.
Okay, one more, I think. Take a look at this one, which is medical, and see how you would translate this and really get somebody who doesn't know anything to be interested in this, and how you could connect with them as a person.
You know, this is a language that's obviously much more understandable to most people than the previous two. Yeah, well, I guess I am. Well, you know, cognitive impairment, that's...
Valerie, you want to take a crack at this?
Sure. So we all know that in aging populations, brain function or cognitive dysfunction like Alzheimer's and dementia. Should I start over?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we all know that in aging populations, cognitive dysfunction like dementia or Alzheimer's, it becomes more prevalent. This is saying that sepsis, which is basically a poisoning of the bloodstream by bacteria, actually can be a factor in making it worse. And that probably occurs when these older people go to the hospital, and that's that's a place where they can sepsis can be happening to their systems.
Related to me. Make it more personal.
So something you have to be careful of as you get older and are struggling to keep your mind young and your health intact is to remain healthy and vigilant when you go to the hospital, because you can have a poisoning of your blood system that will make you even more impaired in your brain function.
Okay. Make it more personal. Do it one more. Make it one more layer, making it more personal for me. Make me immediately connect with something or somebody I know who might relate to this immediately, or close.
You know, so another way of saying this is that aging leads to a breakdown of many of our body functions and systems, including our defense against infections, brain function, etc. All of these may be interrelated in that the susceptibility to a serious infection, such as sepsis, could set back the function of the brain, leaving the person even more impaired afterwards.
Okay, Liz, can we get the mic in the very back row? Yeah. Who do I know who's getting old? Who do most people know? Not everybody. Who do most people know who are getting older?
Hi. What immediately impacted me was that it affects all of your systems so much that as you age, you begin losing your ability to function independently, where you become more and more dependent on other people just to survive.
Right. So the question is, how do I make this a compelling message to somebody? We need the mics quickly. Yeah. Two more, and then will show you what somebody did, I think, at one of the workshops to translate this, to distill this.
So maybe we could start out saying, so last year my grandma was in the hospital and she came away with an infection, and I noticed afterwards that it seemed like her Alzheimer's was getting worse. So I decided to study this, and what I found in looking at large populations of people that had also had infections, blood infections, that there was a substantial, or I was able to confirm that they also, on average, experienced worsening cognitive symptoms.
Okay, so now we're getting closer. My grandmother, we start with my grandmother. I'm not talking, if it's not accurate, it's wrong. So we don't do that if it's wrong.
I was going to try starting something like, if your grandmother gets a cut, make sure she treats it immediately. Because if she gets an infection in the blood, it can result in in a more serious mental decline.
So here's how somebody did it at one of the workshops. And if it's not accurate, then it doesn't work. So we need to know that. If your grandma nearly died from a blood infection, but then pulled through, you'd feel like celebrating. But there may be a catch. That's what somebody wrote. Research has found that many elderly people never bounce back completely from the blood infections called sepsis. Instead, they can have increased problems with thinking, etc., etc. This is what somebody wrote at another workshop. In an attempt to take that and distill it in a way that might be accessible for an ordinary person who would then ask more questions. So that's what they did. Now, we're going to go watch Brian Greene, who goes on the Colbert Show and is asked to explain string theory.
All right,
Okay.
let's see if this, hold on. Okay.
And before you do that, let's just watch what he does and tell me what you think.
Uh-oh. Did you want to?
We want to go back and watch Brian Greene
right, I know.
as an example of someone who's trying to communicate an incredibly complicated thing on the Colbert Show in a couple of minutes, and see how he does it and what you think.
Wait, I'm just, why am I not getting that? Okay.
There, you just had it.
There
That's
it
it.
is.
Click.
I did it.
Forgive me, I called you Mr. It's doctor. Is it doctor?
It is doctor, but
It is
Mr.
doctor.
works.
What is your actual doctor in?
In theoretical physics.
Okay. Now, specifically, your interest and your area of expertise is string theory.
That's right.
Now, but to understand string theory, I understand we also have to understand quantum mechanics.
That's true.
And really understand that, we probably should have a working knowledge of relativity.
That would help.
Okay. So explain those three real quick.
Sure.
What is string theory? People hear about it. It's very hot.
Yep. It's a theory that tries to realize a dream that Albert Einstein had for 30 years but never found. It was a dream of a unified theory of physics, a single idea, single equation that might possibly describe everything in the universe, the big, the small, and everything in between.
What are these little strings? Are we literally talking about strings here?
So the idea of the theory is that we are, in
But that doesn't
fact...
make sense. I mean, everything's round in the world.
looks
This
round.
is round, the globe is round.
That's right.
Your head is round. Why would something be string-shaped?
Well, if you follow the mathematics of this theory, it tells us...
Go ahead.
Okay, good. It suggests that if you were to examine the structure of matter on tiny, tiny scales, it would look different from the matter we see in everyday life.
Now, can we do that? Can we go examine it? Can we look at it?
Not as small as we'd like in order to see the strings
So we
themselves.
can't actually physically look and prove that this is true or not
Not
true?
yet. Absolutely
okay,
not.
So you can just say things and not have to prove it.
We could.
What's that like?
That's right. But here's the thing. The mathematics of the theory has to make sense, and the theory has to embrace previous discoveries like relativity and quantum mechanics in a sensible way. That is a huge requirement that any theory has to pass. And you can't just say anything because of that.
Well, you can't?
No, you can't. We can try.
How about, let's say something crazy.
Okay.
Strings exist in 2 dimensions at once.
See, that wouldn't work. That wouldn't be compatible with relativity.
No?
Yeah.
Well, and don't these strings have crazy properties? Like they're curled up inside themselves?
Well, they're tiny little loops
Yes.
of vibrating energy, and the vibrating strings look like the vibrating strings on a violin or a cello, but they're really tiny.
Kidding me. They literally look like, if we could look, it would be a string. It's not a metaphor. It's a string.
The idea is that
Attached to
literally,
what?
that's right, attached to itself. So it could have ends that would be attached to space itself, or loops that have no ends that would vibrate in space.
Now do you see why
vibrating
people
into
like
existence.
intelligent design?
Well,
You see, it just seems easier than that, you know? I mean, Occam's razor tells us that the simplest answer is usually the right one. Which is easier to understand, that or it just happened?
well, here's the thing. It's definitely easier to follow your answer.
Thank you.
But we have learned that our sense of what's right and wrong needs to be dictated by data, by observations, by cold study of the facts. And relativity and quantum mechanics make predictions.
By what's right and wrong?
Yeah, that helps, to use that as a judgment. Absolutely. Let me give you an example.
I'm not a big fan of facts.
Yeah, let me just give one thing. Quantum mechanics can make a prediction for the properties of a little particle called an electron. You probably know of it.
I've heard of them, yeah.
It's got magnetic properties.
Right.
Quantum mechanics makes a prediction 10 decimal places long regarding the magnetic properties. You do the experiment, and the experiment agrees with the calculation to those 10 decimal places. That is an incredibly convincing piece of evidence that these ideas are taking us toward truth. They're not made up, they're not pulled out of a hat, they're telling us about the true nature of the world.
So you're saying I descended from a monkey?
I didn't actually say that.
No, you're implying. By saying that science has more validity than what I feel, you're implying I descended from a monkey. Face it.
Well, if you don't like the idea, that's right. What we have learned, the universe doesn't care much about our tastes.
I don't care for the universe. The feeling is mutual. I'd change a few things. Last night's sunset, a little more red.
Yeah, I saw it. I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Now here he is. I'll get to you in a second, Casey. This is kind of a combat situation. This is obviously, and he's trying to stay on message and try to keep it simple. Casey will have some comments about the science, I think, but is trying to make it understandable. And you know Colbert is trying to push him off, push him away, and he's going back and staying affable and engaging and just keeps going. Anybody have any other observations before I throw it? Yes.
Okay, what I was going to say is I like that witty repartee, and I think that a lot of average everyday people will remember string theory just because of this.
I think you're right. Now the question is, I think they will. And this is a way that Brian Greene can get this message to lots of people, as well as sell his book, of course, but it's a way he can get this message to a much broader audience. And he's obviously doing this at an incredibly simple level. The question is it inaccurate? And if you want to know more, you're going to want to know more. And he uses Einstein's name immediately because he's so recognizable to people. He starts with, we need a theory that explains everything, and this may be the theory. He doesn't start by trying to explain string theory and quantum mechanics. He never defines quantum mechanics. He never defines relativity. He doesn't even try, right? Because that would be a dead end. Then he's finished, and he knows that. Yes?
Something I noticed at first, Brian Greene was brilliant, right? It was fantastic. But I hadn't appreciated how brilliant Colbert was. Because his struggles are interesting. Antagonism is interesting. So part of it's like a fight. Can he throw him off or not? Is he going to get back on? So you watch it partly, it was much better than you actually asked, and string theory proved it. What's it about? The neutron, blah, blah, blah. So the fact that there was a fight actually made it more interesting than asking a series of questions about string.
Well, also, Colbert gives him the opportunity to make the defense for science generally, and Greene makes it brilliantly, and I think that's really, to my mind, the strongest part of what he does when he talks about making a prediction to 10 decimal points and then having, that's really, I think probably a lot of people learned something about how you could think you have evidence of an unseen and unseeable thing from seeing that explanation. But Colbert, in a way, it was a softball. He handed him the opportunity, but a lot of people would have not made the most of that opportunity. I think the way
totally
Greene
agree
did.
with you. I thought it was a mock antagonism in a way. He was really, allowing Brian Greene to make a point about something that he obviously has an opinion on. So.
Casey, do you want to have a couple of comments? Were you going to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of really unacceptable lies in there. I think the first one, and there's no reason why it need to be said to make it interesting. No way this is a theory of everything. It's a theory of fundamental particles. Can't explain love, slugs, anything at all. And that has led to a serious problems in the field. Second thing, instead of saying relativity in quantum mechanics, which nobody knows what that means, you can just say the weird physics of the very small and the strange things that happens when things go very fast. And the fourth thing that bothers me is when vulgarizers like myself use the theory predicts in a way that is completely contrary to people think as prediction as fortune telling the future. And what he's saying is, if this theory is right, it means that this other thing is also true, and that's very different. So I think those are the kinds of oversimplifications that can really damage science, despite the fact that it was entertaining.
Okay, I mean, Casey's comments aside, I thought Brian Greene did a tremendous job. Now, Brian Greene, and we accept what you said, is a master at this, okay? And not everybody's going to be Brian Greene. But you can learn from Brian Greene, though, on what he's trying to do. He sticks to some big ideas. He probably goes on Colbert, where when you go to Colbert, they give you 8 minutes of taping, and they usually reduce it. They edit it down to 4 minutes. This is what they tell you before you arrive. He knows what he wants to say. Brian Greene knows he wants to leave there making 3 or 4 points, not 20 points. He wants to make 3 or 4 points, and no matter what Colbert says to him, he's going to try to get those 3, 4 points. And whether he oversimplified or not, he's determined to do that. And of course, it's Colbert who opens up the door to the quantum mechanics and the relativity. And that's what you want to do, okay, when you start communicating with an audience. What are the couple of things initially that I want to make sure I don't leave here without those people understanding 3 or 4 points?
But even that thing where he opens up about, so explain quantum mechanics and relativity in 1 minute or in 2 minutes. That's, again, he's explaining to the audience. We're not going to be able to explain this stuff. He's letting Brian Greene move beyond that by showing how absurd it would be to think you can explain it. Now, if you don't have a Colbert to tell you that, you can say it yourself. Like, to really understand this, you have to understand these 2 other areas of physics, which are very complicated. I'm not going to explain it. So I'm going to give you a simpler version that does not rely on you understanding those. And you'll just know that if you actually wanted to go into it in detail, you would have to learn about these other 2 parts of physics.
So keep this in mind when you distill. Keep in mind one of the last principles, and we're going to go practice in a few minutes, that you're going to get the essence of a couple of things that you really want to get across. And you're going to make that point and start by keeping it accessible. Doesn't mean it has to be oversimplified or wrong, but accessible to somebody and in which they can relate to. And don't be afraid to be dramatic. This is the famous Feynman testimony in Congress about the Challenger explosion, where he uses the glass of water to show that the O-ring, what happens to the O-ring.
You're young for this, but this was the Challenger explosion, the shuttle that exploded in '86, and Feynman was on the investigating panel, and one of the issues was this O-ring. And it was cold at the morning of the Challenger launch, did it become inflexible and crack? And he brought this glass of ice water in and dunked the O-ring into it on television and showed that it lost pliability. And that was a very dramatic moment that kind of cut through a lot of mumbled bureaucratic excuse-making, really.
And so sometimes you do something dramatic. You notice, too, you can use your body language. You notice Brian Greene began to play with his fingers about the strings, and then he used it as an attempt to just use the analogy of the violin. And he was looking for ways that you can just relate to people, even in the way his body language was. And you might want to talk about this, Liz.
Well, this is a quote that we've often used. If you can't explain something to a 6-year-old, you really don't understand it yourself. I mean, we say attributed. I've never actually found the real source for this quote. But, some people think what we're saying is speak as though you're speaking to a 6-year-old, always speak on a 6-year-old level. And that's not it. The point of the quote, we think, is that to really explain something simply and accurately, you have to understand it really, really well. And that's a problem, for instance, speaking as a journalist, that journalists often get into explaining things that they don't really understand them well enough, so that when they try to simplify, they make mistakes and introduce errors. But you don't have that problem. This is the flip side of the curse of knowledge. This is the blessing of knowledge, that because you have a deeper knowledge, you should be able to explain something both accurately and in a way a 6-year-old can understand. And of course, 6-year-olds are pretty smart.
So if my grandson was here, or Alan's grandson or granddaughter, you should be able, even at their level, to give them some understanding of what you do. Not talking down to them and not explaining everything that you do, but if they said to you, you know, what do you do? Do you teach? Do you do research? You should be able to relate to them in a way that makes sense and that they'll understand. But to do that, you really have to know your work. And, you know, I want to just end by reinforcing something. We were at Stony Brook doing a workshop, and somebody came up to Carl Safina, who is the co-chair of our Center of Communicating Science. Some of you may know him. He's an ocean conservationist, Carl Safina, and an author, and he's on PBS and CNN. And they said to him, and I think it was a woman from Virginia Tech, and she said, what do I say to my colleagues when I go back to my university who are not interested in doing this? Or say, it doesn't matter. Or why should I want to do this? What do I say? How do I overcome it? And this is what he said. If you choose not to communicate what you do, your work will be increasingly irrelevant. And then the last part, which gets back to kind of in a loop to what we started with yesterday. If you don't do this, somebody else is going to walk into that vacuum and give people information that's not correct. They will misinform them, and they will seek to distort or even misinform for their own gain. So when scientists don't come forward and do this, it's not like there's a vacuum and nothing happens. Something else happens. Something else happens. Somebody fills that vacuum. And that's where we get into the climate change and the autism and vaccines and everything. Somebody fills the vacuum if you don't do it. So that's really something you need to think about. And when you talk to your colleagues who seem resistant, I think you've got to make clear to them.
That's it.
Anyhow, that's kind of the overview, and now we're going to break down into some groups, and we're going to all craft these things. Anybody have any more comments, questions, thoughts about any of this?